They didn't even give me a seat. The chairs were lined up in perfect white rows on the manicured lawn, each one tied with gold satin bows. Laughter and camera shutters filled the air. A string quartet played some soft classical piece I couldn't even hear over the blood pounding in my ears. I stood behind the crowd, uninvited, unacknowledged, and invisible. My half-sister, Vanessa, glowed in her designer wedding gown, walking down the aisle on my stepfather's arm. The guests swooned and whispered about how beautiful she looked. I didn't even make it into the program, not as a bridesmaid, not as a sibling, not even as a guest. I wasn't real family, they said. Not when my father died. Not when they locked up his study like it was some forgotten tomb. Not when they read the first version of the will, but conveniently couldn't find the second one. But I knew better. And today, I brought it with me. From the worn envelope in my purse, I pulled out a thick stack of legal papers and felt the weight of my father's final words. The original wedding officiant hadn't shown up today. But I had. I stepped out from behind the crowd, right into the aisle, right in front of Vanessa's shocked face. The music stopped. Every head turned. Before. "You say I do," I said, my voice sharp and cutting through the air like glass. "I think it's only fair everyone hears what my father really wanted." Gasps. Then silence. Then chaos. Her groom looked confused. My stepmother turned pale. Someone dropped. A champagne flute. I unfolded the will slowly, deliberately, and raised my eyes to meet Vanessa's, full of fury and disbelief. I smiled. And then, I told them everything. But to understand how I ended up shattering my own sister's wedding with a legal bombshell, you have to know what happened after my father died. You have to understand the months of gaslighting, the secrets buried beneath. Luxury, the betrayal I didn't see coming until it nearly broke me. You have to know how it feels to be erased from your own family portrait, and why I had no choice but to become the villain in their perfect little fairy tale. It didn't start with the wedding. It started the day my father's heart stopped beating, and mine started to break. When I was 9 years old, my father taught me how to fix a leaky faucet in our old kitchen sink. It was one of those cramped, echoey apartments in the city, the kind where you could hear your neighbors arguing through the vents. But I remember that day more vividly than any of the birthday parties I had as a kid. Dad knelt beside me on the tiled floor with a rusty wrench and grease-stained hands, guiding me through every step. "Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty," he said, with a grin. I messed it up 3 times before getting it right. Still, he high-fived me like I'd just invented indoor plumbing. That was my dad, Alan Whitaker. Brilliant, self-made, and full of the kind of gentle patience the world rarely rewards. He built his wealth from nothing. A kid from a broken home who became a civil engineer, then a small real estate mogul, and finally, a man with his name etched on plaques outside buildings he designed. He built everything, except a perfect family. My mother left us when I was 5. No note, no goodbye, just gone. I only remember the smell of her lavender perfume fading from my bedsheets and the silence that followed. It was just Dad and me after that, until he met her. Her name was Margaret. She was all pearls and posture, a widow from the upper side of town with money and class oozing out of her smile. I didn't hate her at first. I was 10. What did I know? She brought me books and fancy chocolates and complimented my mature vocabulary. But even then, I noticed how differently she looked at me, like I didn't belong in the picture she was painting. Vanessa came with the deal. 2 years older than me, blonde curls like a princess, dimples like a movie star, and a passive-aggressive streak that would have made a cobra proud. She wasn't cruel, not outright. Just subtle. Calculated. She'd borrow my things and forget to return them. Spread rumors at school I couldn't prove. smile sweetly when adults were around, and twist the knife the moment they left. Dad never saw it, or maybe he chose not to. By the time I turned 16, we'd moved into a bigger house in the suburbs, and my life became a silent tug of war between being the daughter he raised and the outsider they groomed me to become. Despite it all, I had one dream: to become an architect, just like Dad. We'd spent hours in his office drawing blueprints together. He'd give me assignments, sketching my dream home, redesigning a park, solving structural puzzles. I still remember the day he handed me a pristine leather sketchbook with my initials monogrammed on the front. "You're going to be better than me someday," he said, his voice catching. That book meant the world to me. It still does. But Margaret didn't want me following in his footsteps. She needs to think about something more attainable, I overheard her say once. Not everyone's cut out for this line of work. Translation: not your real daughter. Dad pushed back for a while. He paid for my college applications, helped me prep for my entrance interview at Ellison School of Design. But he grew tired, distracted, older. Margaret's voice grew louder. Vanessa got the spotlight. I got the leftovers. Dad's heart attack wasn't sudden. There were signs: fatigue, shortness of breath, the stubborn way he brushed it off like a minor inconvenience. But when the call came, I wasn't ready. I was in my dorm room, halfway through a coffee I'd microwaved 3 times, preparing for a midterm review when my phone rang. "Ms. Whitaker, this is St. John's Medical Center. You're listed as your father's emergency. Contact." Everything after that blurred. The cold tiles of the hospital, the beep of machines, the silence when they stopped. I arrived too late. They told me he died clutching a small drawing in his hand, one of mine. A sketch I had sent him last Christmas. It was of the cottage we always talked about building together by the lake, with a wraparound porch and a crooked chimney. I cried harder, knowing that was the last thing he saw. Margaret arranged everything. Vanessa gave a eulogy that made her sound like she'd been Dad's shadow for decades. She recited memories that weren't hers, made jokes about childhood camping trips she never attended. I wasn't even asked to speak. I sat in the second pew, not the front row. No one said anything when they printed the obituary without my name. No, one batted an eye when Margaret began referring to herself as executor of the estate. 2 weeks later, they called a family meeting in the study, Dad's study. The room smelled like old books and aftershave and something sacred that had been violated. Margaret sat at his desk like a queen on a borrowed throne. Vanessa sipped from a crystal glass like she owned the world. A suited attorney read the will aloud. In it, Margaret was granted power of attorney. Vanessa inherited the house and majority shares in Whitaker Developments. I was mentioned once. And, to my daughter Riley, I leave the keepsake box from my office desk and the contents therein. That was it. A box. Margaret folded the document and smiled like the matter was closed. But I knew my father, and something didn't add up. I found the box later that night, hidden beneath blueprints and engineering books. It was small, carved from cherry wood, and locked with a brass latch. Inside, I found a faded photograph of Dad holding baby me. A letter he wrote but never sent, titled, "In case anything ever happens to me," and a second envelope, sealed and stamped. Final will, revised, signed and witnessed, March 14th. That was just 2 months before his death. Heart racing. I read every word. It was completely different. In the revised will, he left equal shares of the estate to me and Vanessa. Appointed an independent executor, his old college friend, Charles Hampton. Clearly stated that no version of this will is valid unless dated March 14th or later. He knew they would try to overwrite him. He planned for it. And yet, that will never saw the light of day. I was stunned, but also terrified. If I brought this forward, I'd be challenging my stepmother and stepsister in court. I was still a student with no money, no allies, and no real understanding of probate law. They had connections, lawyers, reputation, but I had the truth. And the truth was, my father wanted me to be part of his legacy, not boxed out of it. He knew they'd ice me out. He knew Vanessa would treat the family business like her personal kingdom. But more than the money, it was about what was right. About the father who believed in me, the man who taught me to sketch, to build, to dream. If I stayed silent, they'd erase me from his story. If I spoke up, they'd try to destroy me. I made a choice that night. I would wait. I would gather evidence. I would make them feel comfortable. And then, on the one day they least expected it, when all eyes were on them, I would show up and speak the words my father never got to say. At the wedding. Vanessa's wedding. The same wedding they didn't invite me to. The same wedding where she'd planned to announce her role as CEO of Whitaker Developments. The same wedding where she'd celebrate the crown she stole. I would be there. With the truth. And I'd burn their fairy tale to the ground. The wedding invitation never came. Not by mail, not by email, not even a group text. I found out from Instagram. There it was. Vanessa Whitaker, tagged in a post from an upscale bridal boutique, posing in a champagne-colored dress worth more than my yearly rent. Caption. She said yes to the dress. Countdown to the Whitaker wedding begins. The post had hundreds of likes. Among them, Margaret, and the caption of her comment, "So proud of my beautiful daughter. Your father would be beaming. Your father." The words punched through my ribcage. He wasn't her father. He was mine. I scrolled faster. Photos of bridal brunches, cake tastings, rehearsal dinners. Vanessa was glowing in every one, laughing, posing with friends, flaunting her diamond ring like a trophy. There were no signs of me anywhere, no tag, no mention, no seat at the table. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself, let them have their glossy little fantasy. But then came that post. It was a candid shot. Vanessa standing in the Whitaker Developments headquarters lobby, holding a press release. The company Dad built from nothing. Caption. Excited to officially step in as CEO of Whitaker Dev, honoring my father's legacy the best way I know how. Boss Bride. Legacy Matters. That hashtag, Legacy Matters, made my skin crawl. I stared. At the screen so long my phone dimmed. Vanessa, in heels she didn't earn, was about to inherit everything. Not just the company. The story. The memory. The man who raised me. The revised will burned in my drawer, unopened since the night I found it. She didn't just erase me from the wedding. She was erasing me from existence. And that's when something inside me snapped. Reached out to Charles Hampton, the man named executor in Dad's actual will. They hadn't even notified him after the funeral. Margaret had used her legal influence to fast-track the old version, never disclosing the updated one. Charles was shocked, furious even. "This is a legal disaster waiting to happen," he said. "Your father was very specific. He had concerns about being misrepresented if something happened to him. He promised to help. Quietly. If you're right, and this will holds up, we can petition for a full estate audit. But we'll need to make it public. And that means a legal challenge. Are you prepared for that kind of war, Riley?" Was I? The scared part of me, the girl who'd been pushed aside her whole life, wanted to say no. But the daughter Alan Whitaker raised? She wanted justice. "I'll do it," I said. He paused. "Then start preparing. They'll come after you the moment they know. It happened 3 nights before the wedding. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered out of instinct. Riley? Margaret. I hadn't heard her voice since the funeral. It was silk dipped in acid. I understand you've been stirring things up. I stayed quiet. I just want to remind you how difficult it would be for someone like you to take on a fight like this, she continued. Legally, financially, emotionally. You mean someone without a fake smile and $1 million lawyer? I shot back, her voice lowered. You were never supposed to be involved in this, Riley. You should be grateful we let you keep that college fund. If you disrupt this wedding, if you humiliate my daughter, I will make sure you regret it. Click. I stared at the phone. I should have been scared. Instead, I felt more certain than ever. I didn't want to destroy the wedding. I wanted to reveal the truth. But there would be collateral damage, and I had to be precise. I spent the next 2 days putting everything in order. I scanned the revised will, consulted Charles again, and secured a certified statement of its validity. I even printed copies, 5 of them, in case they tried to claim I forged it. Then, I called one of the photographers Vanessa had tagged in her Instagram story, said I was a friend of the family and offered double the rate to get a second shooter, spot cash up front, no questions asked. He said yes. I now had access to the guest list, the schedule, and the location. The wedding was being held at Whitevale Estate, an extravagant vineyard 40 miles outside the city. Everything about it screamed luxury, the kind of place where people drink $80 wine like it's tap water. I dressed carefully. Black dress, clean lines, no frills. I wanted to look like a ghost in their fairy tale, something they couldn't ignore, no matter how hard they tried. I slipped in with the catering team, holding a camera bag I borrowed from the real second shooter. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the soft music playing in the distance. Through the hedges, I saw the setup. Rows of chairs, white petals scattered down the aisle, guests fluttering around with cocktails and fake smiles. I spotted Vanessa laughing near the bar, radiant and smug, her hair curled into perfect waves. Then I saw Margaret, wearing pearls again, grinning like she'd won. And suddenly, it hit me. They really thought they'd gotten away with it. I stepped out from behind the tent, the envelope gripped tightly in my hand. Someone spotted me. Someone who shouldn't have. Vanessa's fiancé. He froze, then walked toward me, confused. Riley? Wait, what are you doing here? I opened my mouth to answer, but then, Hey, you're not supposed to be here, a security guard barked from the side. 2 more rushed toward me, reaching for my arm. I had to make a decision. Now, run, or reveal everything. Wait, Riley! Vanessa's fiancé, Jason, looked stunned. He was tall, clean-cut, the type of man who probably never had to worry about being underestimated. He'd only met me twice, once at the funeral, once before that at a charity gala where Vanessa pretended not to know me. The security guard grabbed my arm again. Ma'am, you need to leave. This is a private event. I met Jason's eyes. You need to see this. I pulled the envelope from my coat. It was worn now, a little creased, but the words on it still read clearly. Final will of Alan Whitaker, signed and witnessed. He blinked at it. Then, from behind him, What's going on here? Margaret. Her heels clicked on the stone path like a gavel of judgment. She saw me and went pale, then red, then something darker, more dangerous. This is a trespasser, she said sharply. Get her out, now. Wait, Jason said. She has something... But Margaret cut him off. Jason, that girl is delusional. You've seen how she behaves. I opened the envelope and pulled out the will. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. This is my father's last legal will, dated March 14th. It supersedes everything you submitted. A small circle had gathered now. Curious wedding guests, whispering, watching. And just like that, Margaret's perfectly curated fantasy began to crack. Before anyone could drag me out, I turned to the photographer I had paid. "Hit record," I whispered. He did. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through the music. "Before this ceremony continues, you should all know the truth." Gasps. Phones came out. Margaret reached for one guest's camera, hissing, "Stop filming." But it was too late. I held up the document. "This is the last legal will of Alan Whitaker, signed just 2 months before his death. In it, he names both daughters as equal heirs. He also appoints a different executor, Charles Hampton. Everything that followed his passing? It's fraud," someone murmured. Then someone else said, "Wait, is that true?" Jason took the paper from me. He stepped aside, reading it silently. Then his brows furrowed. "She's not lying." Vanessa arrived, breathless, just as he finished. "Jason, what are you doing? Why are you talking to her?" He turned to her slowly. "Is this true, Vanessa? Did you and your mom hide this?" Her face crumpled, but only for a second. Then she snapped into performance mode. "She's manipulating you. That paper could be fake." Jason handed it to the wedding officiant. "Then let's verify it. If it's fake, it'll be obvious." And now, Margaret looked panicked. "We are not ruining this day for a piece of paper." "You already ruined it," I said, "the day you lied." 30 minutes later, we were in the estate's private lounge, doors locked. Vanessa's makeup artist sobbed quietly in a corner, unsure if she should be touching up the bride or calling an Uber. Margaret was on the phone, whispering urgently to her attorney. Jason sat beside me, flipping through the printed will again. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "She said your dad left everything to Vanessa because you didn't want to be involved." "Yeah," I said flatly. "I was the first person who ever dreamed of joining his company." He looked at me then, like he was truly seeing me for the first time. Across the room, Margaret hung up. "Well," she said coldly, "you've had your dramatic moment, Riley. Now here's what happens next." She walked over, cool and crisp, like a judge delivering a sentence. "You walk out of here with a non-disclosure agreement, a modest check, and no further mention of this so-called will. If you take this public, I promise you, it will destroy you, financially, socially, legally." Jason stood up. "Are you serious right now?" Margaret ignored him. "Think carefully, Riley. You'll lose." I looked at Jason. For a moment, he seemed to lean my way. Then Vanessa stepped in. "She's doing this to ruin our wedding, out of spite. You really think this is about justice? She couldn't even show up to Dad's funeral on time." "That's not fair," Jason said. "She was across the country." "She's not family," Margaret snapped. And that word, not family, cut deeper than anything else. Jason looked between the three of us, as though trying to decide what reality to believe. Then, he sighed and handed the will back to Margaret. "I can't be a part of this mess," he muttered. "Just figure it out. I'll be with the guests." He left. Coward. I sat down. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only ache. Margaret leaned close. "You had your little tantrum. Now disappear, or I'll bury you in court filings you can't afford to open." I looked at her. Really looked, and for the first time, I saw it. She wasn't powerful. She was terrified. Terrified that I was right, that her empire was paper thin, that my father loved me more than she ever could buy or manipulate her way into. "I'm not going anywhere," I said softly. That night, after being escorted out of the venue under the guise of a guest miscommunication, I sat in my tiny apartment, knees pulled to my chest, wondering if I had just lit my entire life on fire for nothing. Then the call came. Charles Hampton. "I filed the injunction," he said. We're officially contesting the estate. I blinked. How? I thought it would take weeks. I had a few strings I could pull. And something else. He sent a file to my email, a security tape, dated March 28th, the day after my father's funeral. It showed Margaret entering his office, unlocking the file cabinet, and removing something. The timestamp lined up exactly with the day I first asked to retrieve Dad's belongings, and was told they'd already been cleared out. She didn't just overlook the real will, she removed it. The next morning, headlines hit local news. Heiress wedding crashes under legal fire, contested will surfaces. They didn't use my name at first, but then came the tabloid blogs. Estranged stepdaughter crashes wedding, claims fortune. Photos of me at the vineyard, holding the envelope. The narrative was already being twisted. I checked my phone. 50 new DMs, a mixture of support, insults, offers from podcast producers. Then came a voice message from my old professor. Riley, I saw the story. I just want you to know, I believe you. And then another, from one of Dad's former colleagues. Your father would be proud. And suddenly, the tide began to shift. Charles called again 2 days later. We found her, he said. Who? The notary who witnessed the March 14 will. She moved states right after, but she remembers Alan, vividly. We flew out to meet her. She confirmed everything. He told me his wife and stepdaughter were pressuring him to tidy up the estate. Said he didn't trust them. She signed a sworn affidavit. Legal gold. With that, and the footage, Charles filed for full probate litigation. We had a case, and now, 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom in front of a judge. Vanessa sat across from me in tailored black, no longer a bride, but a defendant. Margaret looked older now, tired, thinner. Charles stood beside me. The judge adjusted his glasses. I've reviewed the evidence. The March 14 will is legally valid and takes precedence. I exhaled sharply. Then the judge turned to Vanessa and Margaret. Your actions after Alan Whitaker's death, particularly the concealment of this will, qualify as willful misconduct. Vanessa flinched. Margaret closed her eyes. And therefore, effective immediately, the estate and its assets shall be divided equally between Riley Whitaker and Vanessa Whitaker, as per the March 14th document. Silence. Then, my knees nearly gave out. But I smiled, because I hadn't just fought for inheritance. I fought for truth, for legacy, for my father. The night after the verdict, I couldn't sleep, not because of excitement or relief, but because something was still missing. I had won, on paper, but I still felt hollow. I wandered around my apartment at 2 a.m., touching random things like they were unfamiliar, a chipped mug from grad school, an unopened letter from the leasing office, a faded photo of Dad and me, taken before Margaret ever entered our lives. I had it framed, even though the corners were worn. In the photo, I was on his shoulders, holding a giant foam finger at some baseball game. He was laughing, not the polite chuckle he gave shareholders, the real laugh, the one that crinkled his eyes and shook his shoulders. Back then, he was just Dad. Not Alan Whitaker, CEO, just Dad, who used to sing off-key in the car and build ridiculous Lego castles with me on Sunday mornings. That version of him felt so far away. I sat down on the floor and pulled out the box I'd kept hidden in my closet. Inside were things I'd collected after he died. A pair of his cufflinks. The fountain pen he gave me when I graduated. A voice memo he sent me just weeks before. The heart attack. I hit play. Hey, kid. Just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. I know I don't say that enough, but I mean it. Don't let anyone make you feel small. You've got that fire in you, just like your mom. Keep going. Okay? Love you. I broke. The bow. Sobs came quietly at first, then all at once. Not the kind you can hide, the kind where your whole body folds in on itself. I cried until I couldn't breathe, until the carpet beneath me was soaked, until I was 13 again, hiding in the school bathroom after Margaret told me my mother was a bad influence, until I was 20, watching my father slowly stop returning my calls, until I was 27, standing outside the funeral. Too late. They buried him without me, without telling me. I wasn't even invited to say goodbye. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the will. It was about being erased. Systematically, strategically. They had rewritten my father's life story without me in it, and expected me to nod politely from the margins. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the last full conversation I had with him. It was on a Wednesday. He'd called me from the office. "You still writing those boring grant proposals?" he teased. "They're not boring," I said. "They fund cancer research." "Fair enough. You always were the smart one." He paused. "I'm thinking of making some changes to the company. Bringing in some new leadership." "Like me?" "Maybe. If you're ready." I laughed. "I've been ready since I was 12, Dad." He chuckled. "Yeah, you probably were." That was the last real call. I never heard from him again. A week later, he was gone, and I never got to ask him what he meant by changes. I curled tighter on the floor. The victory didn't feel like one. It felt like a long overdue correction. One that still couldn't resurrect the moments I'd lost. The father I'd lost. I had fought like hell for the right to be called his daughter. But tonight, it didn't feel like enough. They stole him from me. They stole his death, his funeral, his legacy, his name. And for years I let them. I told myself I was too small, too far away, too tired to fight. But now I've seen who I really am, and who he knew I could be. I finally stood up, wiped my face, and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop and began writing, not legal memos, not financial projections, a letter to my father. They tried to erase me, but I wouldn't let them. I remembered who I was, who you raised me to be. I remembered your laugh, your voice. I remembered that look in your eyes whenever you talked about building something that lasted. And I want you to know, I will. Your legacy didn't die with your name or your assets. It lives in me, in the fire you saw, in the fight I gave. You chose me, Dad, and I choose to keep choosing myself. Love, Riley. The tears still came, but this time they didn't feel like surrender. They felt like release, like the final page of a story rewritten, like healing, even if it came late, even if it came bruised. It came, and that had to be enough. After that night on the floor, something changed in me. Grief didn't leave, but it stopped driving. Anger didn't burn out, but I started holding the match instead of the flame. I wasn't crying anymore. I was building. I had spent my entire life avoiding the world my father lived in. The boardrooms, the handshakes that felt like hostage negotiations, the dinners where every toast had a hidden threat baked in. But now, I realized something. I didn't need to become them. I just needed to beat them. And to do that, I had to learn their rules. Fast. Charles Hampton became more than just an attorney. He became a mentor. "I knew your dad for 15 years, he told me one afternoon as we looked over estate recovery paperwork. He was brilliant, but he underestimated how much people like Margaret could twist the knife while smiling. He always believed the best in her, I muttered. Charles raised an eyebrow? No, he just hoped you would never have to see the worst. We worked in 12-hour sprints, breaking down asset transfers, reversing illicit power of attorney claims, even tracing a suspicious trust fund that was set up in the Caymans. one that had been conveniently forgotten when Vanessa submitted the horror. Initial inheritance filing. Every document I uncovered wasn't just evidence, it was armor. 2 weeks into our fight back, a woman named Elise emailed me. Subject line, "You don't know me, but I worked for your father." I hesitated before replying. When I did, her message shook me. Elise had been my father's executive assistant for 3 years, fired by Margaret 6 days after his funeral. I always wondered why, she said when we met for coffee. Now I get it. I knew too much. She brought me files, memos, private notes my dad had dictated about the estate restructuring, even handwritten drafts, and one, in particular, stopped my breath. It was dated the week before his death. Must finalize with Riley before anything is signed. She deserves this seat at the table. There it was, in his handwriting. Undeniable. Margaret had built her empire on silence, on backdoor deals and press releases that smelled like roses even as they hid rot. But I knew how to tell stories, and I had one hell of a story to tell. I called up Ava, my old roommate from college, now an editor at the New York Ledger. "Are you sitting down?" I asked. She laughed. "Why?" I told her everything, and for once, someone listened. 2 weeks later, the headline ran, "Corporate widow accused of hiding will, estranged daughter fights back." It went viral, not just because it was juicy, because it was true. I watched the comments pour in. Good for her. Families like that think they're untouchable. Justice for Riley. How do you erase your own child and think no one will notice? Even Jason sent me a message. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Some apologies come with too much delay. With the public on my side and the courts in motion, I started rebuilding, not just my legal case, but me. I'd spent so long defining myself by what Margaret denied me: family, legitimacy, love. But now, I started making decisions for me. I enrolled in a short business leadership course, not to impress anyone, to prepare. Because my father's company, my company, was headed toward a reckoning. Margaret had bled it slowly for years, hired sycophants, canceled, innovation arms, shifted investment into vanity projects that failed and sunk quietly. With Charles's help, I filed for an emergency shareholder vote, citing fiduciary neglect and the now validated will that gave me co-ownership. Vanessa tried to stop it. Margaret tried to delay it, but the law was on my side, and the board? They smelled blood. The first time I walked into the boardroom, my hands shook slightly, but I wore the navy blue suit Dad gave me for graduation, and his watch, and the expression I remembered from his hardest days: firm jaw, patient eyes, no apology. Vanessa was already there, pretending to review reports. Margaret arrived fashionably late, flanked by lawyers. "You're out of your depth," she whispered as she passed. I smiled sweetly, then tossed me a life jacket. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, Margaret was stripped of her executive privileges. And Vanessa? She stared at me with a new kind of hatred, the kind born not of rivalry, but of fear, because I wasn't going away, and I wasn't quiet anymore. Later that week, I sat with Charles in his office. The golden hour light painted everything honey gold. "I want to go further," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "I want to audit every off-the-book transaction from the last 3 years, and I want to petition to assume the vacant CEO seat." He blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Charles smiled. "I think your father would be proud." That night, just as I was about to shut down my laptop, a new email arrived. From a name I didn't expect. Vanessa Whitaker. Subject: We need to talk, alone. For a second, I hovered over delete, but something told me to read it. I know you think I'm the villain. Maybe I am. But there are things you don't know. Things I need to say. Meet me tomorrow, noon. Dad's lake house. Just us. Was it a trap? Probably. But part of me needed to go. Not for closure, for clarity. The lake house was exactly as I remembered it from childhood summers, except smaller. Isn't that always the way? The trees were taller. The dock more splintered. The front door still had the same creaky hinge. I stepped inside. Vanessa sat at the table. No makeup, no pearls. Just her and a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold. "Didn't think you'd come," she said. "Then why invite me?" She looked out the window. "Because I'm tired of pretending. I hated you," Vanessa said. "Not because of what you did, but because of what you reminded me of." I stayed quiet. You were Dad's favorite. Everyone knew it, even Mom. And she couldn't stand it. She looked at me then, really looked. So she made me her weapon. My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "She planted the idea in my head that you didn't belong, that you'd take everything if we didn't act fast, that if we didn't shut you out, we'd be left with nothing." I swallowed. "And you believed her?" Vanessa nodded. "I was 18, and I wanted to be loved more than I wanted to be right." There it was. The confession I never thought I'd hear. "But don't get comfortable," she said, voice hardening. "This little victory? It won't last. Margaret still has leverage. People owe her favors. There are still board members loyal to her." I stared at her. "Then why bring me here? Why tell me this?" Vanessa stood. "Because when the dust settles, I want you to remember I tried." Then she left, and I sat alone, staring out at the lake. The wind rippled the surface, and I thought of Dad's voice again. "Just like your mom. Fire in her eyes. Doesn't flinch." I returned to the city with more than just insight. I returned with resolve. I called Ava again. "I want to publish a follow-up." "You sure?" "Yes, the full story. This time, I write the script." And I did. I wrote it all down. The manipulation, the erasure, the quiet war behind closed doors, and in doing so, I reclaimed every part of myself they tried to bury. I was no longer not real family. I was Alan Whitaker's daughter, the one who fought. And I wasn't finished yet. The irony? It was a wedding. Vanessa's wedding, to be exact. A picturesque estate outside of Boston, with white rose arches, champagne towers, and string quartets humming under lantern light. The guest list? Everyone who mattered in Dad's world. Former CEOs, finance moguls, charity elites. Everyone, except me, or so they thought. I hadn't been invited, but that never stopped me before. I wasn't there to toast. I was there to remind them. I existed, and I wasn't leaving quietly anymore. Charles had advised against it. Crashing a wedding might be a PR risk, but I wasn't crashing. I was confronting. This wasn't just personal, it was public, and for years they had controlled the narrative, smiled through their lies, erased me with silk gloves. I'd tried courtrooms. I'd tried press. But now was time for a reckoning, a human one, face to face. I wore black, not out of protest, but power. The moment I stepped onto the lawn, conversations paused, heads turned, forks froze midair. I saw the ripple travel across the crowd like a tsunami made of whispers. Vanessa turned pale when she spotted me near the second row of chairs. And Margaret? She didn't flinch. She simply raised her champagne flute and gave me the smile of a lioness about to kill something small. The wedding started. The ceremony was short, poetic, nauseating. When the officiant said, "Speak now or forever, hold your ski." Peace. I didn't move. Not yet. I waited until the reception, until the toasts, until Margaret took the mic to bless the union. She stood with poise, wearing a silver gown that glittered like ice. Family, she said, lifting her glass, isn't just blood. It's loyalty. It's trust. It's showing up when it matters. And that's why I'm so proud of Vanessa. She paused for dramatic effect. She represents the very best of Alan Whitaker's legacy. I stood, loudly, every eye turned. My heels echoed on the marble floor as I walked to the stage. Margaret faltered for just a moment. Then calmly she said, "Security, please." "Don't bother," I said, pulling a thick manila folder from my bag, the same one we'd filed in court, the one with my father's real final wishes. "The only thing getting escorted out tonight is your fantasy." I turned to the crowd. "You've all heard her version of the story," I said. "The one where I didn't exist, where I was some estranged daughter who chose distance." My voice didn't shake. It carried, but that's not the truth. My name is Riley Whitaker. I am Alan's daughter. I was with him until the end, and he didn't forget me. I held up the will. He made me his legal heir, co-owner of Whitaker & Co., his blood, his legacy. The courts validated it. The documents confirm it, and she, I turned to Margaret, spent years hiding it. A gasp. A few guests began murmuring. Someone took out their phone. Vanessa stepped forward, red in the face. "You're ruining my wedding!" I turned to her, calm. "No, your mother ruined your soul. I'm just here to give it a mirror." I opened the folder to reveal a photo, Dad's handwritten note, the one Elise found. I held it up. "Must finalize with Riley. She deserves this seat at the table." His words, his ink, his hand. I passed it to the projector operator. Ava had sent me a media team just in case. The image flashed on a massive screen above the reception, unedited, undeniable. Margaret's face twitched. Vanessa looked like she might vomit. I turned back to the crowd. Margaret orchestrated my erasure. She convinced my father's inner circle that I had cut ties. But she was the one who cut the wires, locked the gates, silenced the calls. I stepped closer to Margaret. And she buried my father without telling me. She didn't even let me say goodbye. The silence in the room was thunderous. Someone in the back clapped. Then another and another. Margaret's mouth tightened into a thin line. "This is a stunt," she hissed. "No," I said coolly. "This is justice." Margaret took the mic. Back, her voice like poisoned honey. "You want applause? Fine. You had a father who made mistakes. We all did. But legacy isn't given, it's earned. I raised Vanessa. I protected this family. You? You abandoned it." I didn't flinch. "You think I'm here for applause?" I said. "I'm here to unbury the truth. You manipulated a grieving man. You isolated him from his daughter, and you drained his company while polishing your pearls." She stepped forward, whispering under her breath. "You think the board respects you? You're just a girl in heels trying to scare lions." I leaned in. "Then you should have remembered. Girls grow into lionesses too." Ava's article dropped 10 minutes later, timed perfectly. Daughter of Whitaker crashes. Wedding drops. Legal bomb. Turns out she's the real heir. By the time the reception was halfway through, reporters were waiting at the estate gates. Shareholders were texting each other. Margaret's allies were scattering like cockroaches under stadium. "Lights and Vanessa?" She ran from the venue in tears because the truth had arrived, wearing heels, holding a folder, carrying fire. The next morning, I took my rightful seat at the head of the Whitaker & Cumber executive table. The vote was unanimous. I was named interim CEO, not because of the will, because of what they saw. Strength, strategy, and a story too powerful to deny. I sat in my father's old chair, looked out over the city skyline, and finally breathed. They tried to erase me, tried to write me out of the story with lies and forged smiles. But I wrote my name, back in, with ink, fire, and proof. And now the company he built, it's in hands he trusted. Mine. The press called it a soap opera wrapped in silk and lawsuits. The tabloids devoured it for weeks. Replays of the wedding confrontation, clips of me holding the will mid-toast, headlines that screamed things like, "The forgotten daughter who became the CEO." From outcast to empire, Riley Whittaker's cold revenge. Real family? She proved them wrong, in front of 300 guests. But behind the drama and viral headlines was something quieter, something that didn't fit into clickbait. Healing, and it didn't come easy. The morning after the wedding, I sat alone in Dad's office, my office now. The sun poured in through tall windows he designed himself. A solid oak desk, untouched since he passed. His old pen still in the drawer. His watch still on the leather tray beside his files. I ran my fingers across the mahogany and cried, not for what I'd won, for what I'd lost. I never wanted his empire. I wanted him. His voice, his laugh, his impossible optimism that tomorrow would be better. But now that I had the company, I was determined to run it with the kind of honesty he deserved, and the kind of integrity Margaret never understood. Elise stayed. In fact, she became my chief of staff. "I always believed you'd be back," she told me one day while sorting Dad's old journals. "You were the only one who didn't look at me like I was an intruder," I said. "You were never the intruder," she replied. "You were the inheritance they couldn't control, or else it's helped too." Quietly, behind the scenes. Fixing what Margaret broke. One by one, the people who mattered came back. Not because I demanded it, because truth, when it's finally spoken, has gravity. Margaret, on the other hand, fought till the bitter end. She hired lawyers, appealed the will again, released statements full of denial and deflection, but every fight only exposed more fake invoices, secret offshore accounts, phantom board votes. Eventually, the SEC launched an inquiry, and Margaret Whittaker, she disappeared from public life. Not in handcuffs? No. In something worse for her. Irrelevance. The kind of silence that can't be dressed in Chanel or silenced by money. And Vanessa? She moved to Europe, sent a formal letter relinquishing any claim to the company. I haven't heard from her since, and maybe that's for the best. Some relationships aren't meant to be mended. They're meant to be remembered. As warnings. One day, months later, I found myself sitting on the same park bench where Dad used to meet me for Sunday walks when I was a little girl. I was wearing his watch, holding his old notebook. Inside were doodles, business ideas, and on one page in messy, capital letters, "Never let the world decide who you are." That was him. Even when I doubted myself, he didn't. Even when he couldn't protect me in life. He left the tools so I could protect myself in death. I launched a foundation in his name, the Whittaker Initiative, for young women in business, who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or orphaned by the system, and at our first fundraiser a girl approached me. Maybe 18, shy, nervous. She said, "Everyone says I don't belong at the table, but I watched your story." She paused. "You made me believe I could build my own." I didn't have a speech ready, but I said the only thing that felt true. Sometimes being pushed out of the room is exactly what makes you strong enough to build your own doors. I'm not bitter. I'm not broken. I'm not some woman defined by revenge. I'm just Riley Whittaker, a daughter, a survivor, a CEO. And if life ever tells you that you're not real family, not worthy, not enough, remember this. Blood isn't the only thing that binds. Sometimes truth does, sometimes grit does, and sometimes you become the legacy no one saw coming. Have you ever been told you don't belong in your own story? Maybe it was family, a boss, a partner, a friend. Maybe it was yourself. But tell me, what did you do about it? I'd love to hear your story. If this story moved you, hit that like button. If you believe truth always finds a way, subscribe for more stories like this. And if you know someone who's been made to feel less than, share this video. Let them know they're not alone. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong, stay loud, and always stay undeniable.